'Twas when the gunpowder spoke. The echo of the gunshot pierced through the morning fog like a warning cry. Don Rodrigo Salazar fell to his knees, his hands trembling as they held the smoking pistol. At his feet, the motionless body of his best friend lay upon the muddy moorland. But this was no ordinary tale of betrayal. What had begun as a land dispute in the mountains of Santander, Colombia, in 1889, would become the darkest secret a family would guard for generations. 60 years later, in 1949, his granddaughter María Eugenia would find a chest buried beneath the floorboards of the old manor house. Inside, a blood-stained diary, 3 silver bullets engraved with initials she didn't recognize, and a yellowed photograph of 5 men who had sworn a pact of silence. But secrets like gunpowder explode when you least expect them. This is the story of how a single bullet changed the destiny of 3 generations, of how honor, revenge, and redemption intertwined in the coffee-growing mountains of Colombia during a century of violence and transformation, of how María Eugenia would discover that the smell of gunpowder haunting her family wasn't just the echo of a forgotten crime, but the signal of an even deeper mystery involving political betrayal, lost gold, and a curse that only truth could break. Because when gunpowder speaks, it doesn't only announce death, it also reveals secrets that should have remained buried forever. Before discovering what secrets that chest held and how it changed an entire family's destiny, subscribe to the channel and hit the bell icon so you don't miss any stories like this one. Leave your like if you're already hooked on this mystery and comment what country you're listening from. I love knowing where my listeners are. Now stay until the end, because what María Eugenia discovered in that diary exceeded everything she could imagine, and the ending will leave you speechless. The morning of March 15, 1889, dawned with fog so thick that men could barely see each other at 20 paces. Don Rodrigo Salazar adjusted his black frock coat and checked his revolver's cylinder for the 3rd time. Facing him, at exactly 40 paces, his lifelong friend, Don Ignacio Mendoza, did the same with trembling hands. "It doesn't have to be this way, Rodrigo," Ignacio shouted through the fog, his voice breaking. "We can still resolve this like civilized men." But Rodrigo was no longer listening to reason. The dispute over the boundaries of El Peñasco estate had escalated too far. 3 months ago, they had been brothers. They had fought together in civil wars, baptized each other's children, shared aguardiente under the same stars, but the discovery of a gold vein in the disputed land had changed everything. The field judge, an old white-bearded man named Don Sebastian, raised his white handkerchief. "Gentlemen, for the last time, is there any possibility of reconciliation?" Silence was his answer. Only the wind whistling through the frailejones broke the moment's tension. "May God forgive you then," the old man murmured, and dropped the handkerchief. The 2 shots rang out almost simultaneously. Rodrigo felt something hot pierce his shoulder, but remained standing. Ignacio wasn't as fortunate. He fell backwards, eyes open, staring at the grey sky beginning to clear. Rodrigo ran toward his friend, dropping his weapon. "Ignacio, Ignacio, forgive me!" But when he reached his side and saw the red stain spreading across his chest, he knew something terrible had just begun. Because in Ignacio's dying eyes he saw no pain. He saw something far worse. He saw knowledge, as if in his final seconds he had understood something Rodrigo still didn't know. "The goal," Ignacio whispered with his last breath, "isn't what you think. The curse has already begun." And then, something impossible happened. From Ignacio's frock coat pocket fell an object that gleamed briefly before sinking into the mud. A silver bullet identical to the one Rodrigo had used, but engraved with strange symbols none of those present had seen before. What did those symbols mean? And what curse had Ignacio mentioned in his final words? 3 days after the duel, Rodrigo Salazar couldn't sleep. Ignacio's final words resonated in his mind like church bells. He got up in the middle of the night and walked to his study, where he had kept the strange silver bullet locked in a drawer. Under the flickering light of a candle, he examined the engraved symbols. They weren't Spanish letters, not even Latin. They seemed ancient, perhaps indigenous. In the center he recognized something. The initials HDV intertwined with a design resembling a mine with 5 entrances. A knock at the door startled him. It was midnight. Who could visit at this hour? He opened cautiously and found 3 hooded men. Before he could shout, one of them uncovered his face. It was Don Sebastian, the duel's judge, but his expression was no longer that of a benevolent old man. His eyes shone with disturbing intensity. "We need to talk, Rodrigo, about what you really found at El Peñasco, and about why Ignacio had to die." The other 2 men entered without waiting for an invitation. Rodrigo recognized one, Don Esteban Cortés, the town notary. The third was a stranger, a tall man with indigenous features and a penetrating gaze. "You knew," said Rodrigo, backing away. You knew about the silver bullet. Don Sebastian closed the door behind him. We knew because we were the ones who gave it to Ignacio 5 years ago, just as we gave one to you, though you don't remember, just as to 3 other men in this town. Rodrigo felt the ground move beneath his feet. What are you talking about? The indigenous man spoke for the first time with a marked accent but precise words. 17 years ago, 5 men descended into a forbidden mine, a mine that my people, the Uwa, had sealed with blood and gold, because what it guarded should never be touched. You 5 broke that seal, you stole the cursed gold, and now, one by one, the mountain will collect its debt. Rodrigo shook his head, but fragments of memory began to emerge like forgotten nightmares. A nocturnal expedition, a tunnel descending beyond what was natural, gold that shone with its own light, and an oath, a pact among 5 men. Ignacio has already paid, continued Don Sebastian. You were the instrument, but not the true executor. The mountain chose your hand because your destiny is intertwined with the other 4. Who are the others? Asked Rodrigo in a choked voice. The notary Cortez pulled out an old parchment. You are the first to know consciously. Ignacio was the second to die. 3 remain. Don Felipe Vargas, landowner in Honda, Don Hernando Duarte, merchant in Bogota, and Don Vicente Salcedo, priest in Villa de Leyva. We all carry marked silver bullets, and we'll all die before the year ends if we don't break the curse. Rodrigo looked at the bullet in his hand. The initials HDV made sense. The initials of 3 of the 5 condemned men. How is it broken? He asked, though he feared the answer. The answer he received that night would change not only his destiny, but that of 3 future generations. 1949. 60 years later, María Eugenia Salazar never knew her grandfather Rodrigo. He died under mysterious circumstances when her father was barely a child, and the family had built a wall of silence around his memory. All she knew was that El Peñasco estate had been sold hastily, and her family had fled to Bogota, as if escaping something invisible but terrifying. Now at 32 years old, widowed by the bipartisan violence bleeding Colombia dry, María Eugenia had returned to the old family manor in Santander to close that chapter definitively. The house was in ruins, abandoned for decades, with cobwebs hanging like ghostly curtains. It was while tearing up the rotten floorboards of the study that she found it, a metal chest buried half a meter underground. Her heart pounded hard as she forced the rusted lock. Inside were 3 objects that would change her life forever. First, a diary bound in black leather, stained with what appeared to be old blood. The first page read, Confessions of Rodrigo Salazar. May God and the mountain forgive me for what I did. Second, 3 silver bullets inside a red velvet pouch, each engraved with different initials and the same strange symbols. Third, a yellowed photograph of 5 men posing in front of a mine entrance. She recognized her grandfather Rodrigo immediately, younger, with an expression of triumph on his face. The other 4 men also smiled, unaware of the fate awaiting them. María Eugenia began reading the diary that same night, by the light of a kerosene lamp. The first pages narrated the duel with Ignacio Mendoza, but what came after was much darker. March 15th, 1889. I killed my best friend today, but now I know I was just a puppet. The mountain's curse chose us 5. Don Sebastian revealed the truth. 17 years ago, when we were young and ambitious, we descended into the mine of 5 tears. We broke the Uwa seal. We stole the sacred gold that guarded the spirits of 5 ancient warriors, and we signed our pact of silence with blood upon that cursed gold. María Eugenia felt a chill. She continued reading with trembling hands. The Uwa shaman warned us that night. He said the gold we had taken wasn't wealth, but prison. That 5 warrior spirits had been chained in that mountain to protect something far more dangerous. A door that must never be opened. By breaking the seal and taking the gold, we partially freed those spirits. Now they seek to complete their liberation through us. The following pages detailed something that froze María Eugenia's blood. Her grandfather hadn't only killed Ignacio Mendoza. In the months following the duel, the other 3 men of the pact also died. Don Felipe Vargas, poisoned by his own wife without her knowing why she did it. Don Hernando Duarte, who shot himself in an apparent suicide. And Don Vicente Salcedo, the priest, who died burned when his church mysteriously caught fire during Mass. Only her grandfather Rodrigo had survived, temporarily. But what María Eugenia read in the diary's last entry left her paralyzed. Today is my last day. I can feel the 5th spirit calling me. I have hidden the 3 remaining bullets and this diary for whoever comes after. If you're reading this, you are of my blood. And the curse is now yours too, because the gold we took wasn't meant for us 5. It was meant for our descendants. We are only the beginning. Forgive me, my son. Forgive me, grandson I will never meet. The door is already opening. María Eugenia didn't sleep that night. At dawn, with the diary clutched to her chest, she made a decision. She needed to find the descendants of the other 4 men. If the curse was real, they were also in danger. She began with the easiest to track. Don Ignacio Mendoza had a son, Augusto, who was now a prominent lawyer in Bucaramanga. María Eugenia traveled by bus for 6 hours on roads destroyed by political violence. When she knocked on the door of Augusto Mendoza's elegant house, an older woman opened with suspicion. "What do you want?" "I've come to speak with Mr. Mendoza about his father. It's urgent. It's about in the mine of 5 Tears." The effect was immediate. The woman paled and shouted into the interior of the house, "Augusto, come quickly!" Augusto Mendoza was a 50-year-old man, distinguished in appearance but with deep dark circles betraying sleepless nights. When he saw the diary in María Eugenia's hands, he collapsed into a chair. "Then it's true," he whispered. "My father told me on his deathbed, but I thought they were deliriums. He said your grandfather had killed him, but that it wasn't his fault, that something controlled them both." María Eugenia showed him the diary pages. Augusto read with tears falling on the yellowed paper. "There's more," said María Eugenia. "I've investigated the others. Felipe Vargas had a daughter, Clemencia, who now lives in Medellín. Hernando Duarte left twin sons, Pedro and Paulo, merchants in Cali. And Vicente Salcedo, though he was a priest, had a secret son, Tomás, who was raised by nuns in Villa de Leyva." "And you believe we're all in danger?" asked Augusto. "The diary says the curse passes from generation to generation, that the 5 warrior spirits need 5 bodies of related blood to complete their liberation." Augusto stood abruptly and walked to a display case. He took out an object wrapped in black cloth. When he unwrapped it, María Eugenia stifled a scream. It was another silver bullet, identical to those in the chest. "It appeared on my desk 3 weeks ago," Augusto explained. "No one had entered. The doors were locked. It simply appeared, and since then, I have dreams. I see the mine. I see 5 men with gold masks calling me, and I see a stone door covered with blood symbols." María Eugenia felt the air become heavier. "We need to find the other 3. And we need to find that mine before it's too late." "Too late for what?" María Eugenia opened the diary to the last page, where her grandfather had drawn something in red ink. A lunar calendar. "My grandfather wrote that the seal can only be completely broken during a lunar eclipse, and according to his calculations," Augusto finished the sentence, voice trembling. "The next lunar eclipse visible from Colombia is in 3 weeks. At that moment, as if the house itself responded to their words, all the lights went out. In the darkness, both heard a sound that shouldn't be possible, the distant echo of a gunshot, and then, closer, much closer, the unmistakable sound of footsteps descending a staircase that didn't exist in that house. The spirits already knew the heirs had gathered, and the hunt had just begun. 2 weeks later, 5 people gathered at the old Salazar manor in Santander. María Eugenia had accomplished the impossible, convening all the heirs of the cursed men. Clemencia Vargas, a 50-year-old schoolteacher from Medellín, was the first to arrive. She brought a box her father had kept, with instructions to open it only when the mountain calls. Inside was another silver bullet and a letter that said, "I poisoned my husband, but I don't remember doing it. It was as if another will moved my hands. If you're reading this, my daughter, flee from Santander. Never return to the mountain." Twin brothers Pedro and Paulo Duarte arrived together from Cali. They were 45-year-old men, identical in appearance but opposite in temperament. Pedro was skeptical and pragmatic, Paulo nervous and superstitious. Both admitted they had found silver bullets in their houses the same night, at the exact same hour, though they lived in different neighborhoods. The last to arrive was Tomás Salcedo, a 40-year-old man with a face marked by scars he didn't want to explain. He had been raised in an orphanage after his father's death in the church fire. He worked as a treasure hunter, ironically, specializing in ancient mines. "I've been researching the mine of 5 Tears for years," Tomás confessed, spreading a map on the table. "Without knowing my own father had been there. But now it all makes sense. Local rumors speak of a mine that eats men. That never returns those who enter, and that can only be found when blood calls to blood." María Eugenia placed the 5 silver bullets on the table, forming a circle. The moment the 5th bullet touched the surface, something extraordinary happened. All began to glow with a pulsating silver light. "Good God," whispered Clemencia. The symbols engraved on the bullets also began to glow, and then rose from the metal like light holograms floating above the table. They reorganized in the air, forming a three-dimensional map of the surrounding mountains. Augusta, with trembling voice, pointed to a spot on the light map. There, the entrance is 3 kilometers north of El Peñasco estate, in a gorge they call the Throat of Silence. Pedro, the skeptical twin, scoffed. "You expect me to believe this? Magic bullets and curses? There has to be a rational explanation. Maybe they're phosphorescent or—" His brother Paulo interrupted him, eyes wide. "Pedro, your hands." Everyone looked. Pedro's hands were covered with a silver patina, slowly spreading up his arms, as if the metal itself was growing from his skin. "What the hell?" Pedro tried to shake off the substance, but it adhered stronger. "Get this off me, get this off!" Tomás acted quickly. He took one of the glowing bullets and pressed it against Pedro's chest. The silver light was absorbed back into the bullet, and Pedro's hands returned to normal. "The spirits are marking us," said Tomás, recognizing their heirs. "The eclipse is in 1 week. If we don't enter the mine and close the door before that night, what will happen?" asked María Eugenia. Tomás looked at Rodrigo's diary, specifically a passage he had marked. "The 5 spirits are not ordinary prisoners. They are guardians who betrayed their duty. They were chained because they opened the door they promised to protect, the door that, according to Uwa legends, connects this world with the place of those who don't sleep." "And what's in that place?" asked Clemencia. The answer came not from Tomás, but from a voice that emerged from the room's shadows, an ancient and raspy voice that made everyone jump from their seats. "Hunger. There is infinite hunger. And if the door opens completely during the eclipse, that hunger will consume first this valley, then this region, and finally, everything." A figure emerged from the shadows. It was an extremely old man, with indigenous features, dressed in traditional Uwa clothing. His eyes were completely white, without pupils. It was the same shaman who had warned their grandfathers 60 years ago, and his presence in that house meant only one thing. Time had run out much faster than they thought. The Uwa shaman, who identified himself simply as the guardian of the last seal, explained he had been watching the gorge for 60 years, waiting for the moment when the heirs would finally gather. "Your ancestors broke the first seal when they stole the sacred gold," he explained with a tired voice. "Upon dying, each weakened another level of protection. Now only one seal remains. The one you 5 must reinforce with your own lives, or break completely with your cowardice." "Reinforce with our lives?" María Eugenia felt a chill. What exactly does that mean? The shaman didn't respond directly. Instead, he showed them something he carried in a leather bag. 5 gold masks, small, the size of medallions. Each represented a different warrior face with expressions ranging from fury to terror. "These are the prisons of the 5 spirits. Your ancestors found them attached to the gold they stole. By taking that gold, they partially freed the spirits, allowing them to influence this world. But the masks still contain their core essence. If you enter the mine and place these masks back on the 5 seal pillars before the eclipse, the spirits will be trapped again for another 100 years. And if we don't," asked Paulo, the superstitious twin, "then the spirits will use your bodies as bridges to cross completely, and the door will open." Pedro, who was still rubbing his hands where the silver patina had appeared, asked what everyone was thinking. "Why us? We weren't the ones who committed the original crime." The old blind shaman looked at him with sightless eyes that seemed to see more than any seers. "Because blood calls to blood. Because the father's sin is transmitted to the son in these spiritual matters, and because you are already marked." Look, everyone examined themselves. Slowly, with growing horror, they discovered the same thing. On the inside of their left wrists, a small silver tattoo in the shape of a door had appeared. The next day, at dawn, the 6 embarked on the journey to the Throat of Silence. The shaman guided them through paths that appeared on no map, roads that opened before them and closed after, as if the mountain itself decided their route. It took them 2 days to arrive. During the journey, they experienced strange phenomena, voices calling their names from empty ravines, shadows moving against the wind, and the constant sensation of being watched by something not completely material. The entrance to the Mine of 5 Tears was exactly like the photograph in the diary, a natural stone arch covered with moss, with 5 rock pillars flanking it. But now the pillars glowed with a sickly light, and the air coming from the mine smelled of copper and something else, of ancient gunpowder. "The bullet," said Tomás suddenly. "We need to carry the 5 silver bullets. They're part of the ritual." Each heir took their corresponding bullet. The moment all 5 bullets were wielded simultaneously, the mine entrance changed. The Uwa symbols carved in stone began to bleed, literally, with a red liquid that wasn't exactly blood, but had the same ferrous smell. "When you enter," warned the shaman, "stay together. The spirits will try to separate you. They will show you visions of your ancestors, offer you the gold that still shines in the depths, but if anyone takes that gold, the seal will break instantly. Are you coming with us?" asked Maria Eugenia. The old man shook his head. "My role is to keep the outer world closed while you are inside. If something comes out of that mine before the eclipse, I will be the last obstacle." The 5 heirs looked at each other. They could turn back now, live their lives ignoring the curse, perhaps survive a few more years before the spirits claimed them one by one, or they could descend. Maria Eugenia was the first to step toward the darkness. "For our grandfathers," she said, "and for all who will come after." One by one, the others followed her. The mountains swallowed their light, but what they didn't know was that the shaman had lied to them about something crucial. There was no way to reinforce the seal without a sacrifice, and that sacrifice required more than just placing masks on pillars. The darkness inside the mine was absolute, not the kind of darkness where eyes eventually adjust, but a blackness so complete it seemed to have weight, texture, presence. The 5 heirs lit their carbide lamps, but the light barely penetrated 2 meters ahead. "Stay together," warned Tomas, who had explored enough mines to recognize danger. "And don't touch the walls." "Why not?" asked Pedro. The answer came when Clemencia accidentally brushed the rock wall with her hand. Immediately her face contorted and her eyes turned completely white. "Clemencia!" Maria Eugenia shook her, but the teacher didn't respond. Instead, she spoke with a voice that wasn't hers. A masculine, ancient voice. "Clemencia, is that your name? How beautiful. Your father called me Vargas. Don Felipe Vargas. Do you remember, daughter? Of course not. You were so small when my hands took the poison and poured it into my own cup. I didn't want to do it, but he was inside me, moving me like a puppet." "Papa?" Clemencia spoke with her own voice, mixed with tears. "Is it you?" "The dead cannot speak, little one." The voice changed again, now colder, crueler. "Only their echoes trapped in stone. I am the one who used your father. I am the one who danced in his blood. And soon I will dance in yours." Augusto abruptly pulled Clemencia's hand from the wall. She collapsed, trembling, breathing with difficulty. "The walls are memory," said Paulo with trembling voice. "The stone has absorbed everything that happened here." They continued descending, following a tunnel that became increasingly deeper. The air grew heavier, laden with humidity, and that persistent smell of gunpowder. After what seemed like hours, they reached an enormous cavern. In the center, glowing with its own light, was a mountain of gold. Coins, bars, ceremonial objects, all piled in a hypnotic golden gleam. And around that treasure, 5 pillars of dark stone rose like sentinels, each with a cavity the exact size of the masks they carried. "It's beautiful," whispered Pedro, walking toward the gold as if hypnotized. "No!" Tomas pulled him back, just as Pedro's foot was about to cross a circle of symbols carved in the floor. Look, where Pedro had almost stepped, the floor wasn't floor. It was an abyss extending infinitely downward, covered by an illusion, and in that abyss, shapes moved, things with too many limbs, mouths where mouths shouldn't be. "The door," Maria Eugenia understood. "It's directly under the gold." At that moment, the gold began to move, to reorganize, forming 5 humanoid figures, warriors of solid gold, with the missing masks on their faces. The 5 spirits had manifested. "Heirs," spoke the largest, with a voice resonating like metal against metal. "You have come to seal us, or to free us. The choice is yours." "There is no choice," declared Maria Eugenia, taking out the first mask. "We came to finish what our ancestors began." The gold warrior laughed, a terrible sound like broken bells. "You think it's that simple? Place masks on pillars, pronounce ancient words, and everything ends. Your ancestors also believed it when they made their pact. But you forget something crucial." The 5 warriors moved simultaneously, surrounding the heirs. "The seal isn't maintained with masks," continued another warrior. "It's maintained with vital essence, with sacrifice. 5 lives sealed this door originally. 5 lives partially opened it, and 5 lives must voluntarily close themselves inside it to restore the balance." The silence that followed was absolute. "They're lying," said Pedro finally. "It's a trick to scare us." But Maria Eugenia remembered the last lines of her grandfather's diary, the lines she hadn't shown anyone. "If my descendants read this, they must know the truth the shaman won't tell them. The seal can only be restored with voluntary death. I tried to kill myself to complete it, but cowardice stopped me. Now the weight passes to those who come after. Forgive me for not being braver." And then, From the depths beneath the gold, something began to rise, something that proved the warriors weren't lying. What emerged from beneath the gold had no defined form. It was more an absence of light than a physical presence, a void with hunger that consumed even sound around it. The 5 golden figures retreated before it, showing for the first time something resembling fear. "That," said the warrior leader, "is what we guard. It's only a fragment of its true form, seeping through the seal's cracks. If the door opens completely during the eclipse," he didn't need to finish the sentence. Everyone could imagine something 1,000 times larger than that fragment, consuming not only the valley, but spreading like an ink stain on a map. "You have 4 days, continued the warrior. 4 days to decide. You can place the masks now and buy time, but the seal will continue weakening. Or you can seal yourselves inside, 5 lives for eternity, and close the door permanently." "There has to be another way," insisted Augusto. "Something that doesn't require dying." Tomás, who had been examining the pillars, spoke with somber voice. "The symbols here, I've seen them in other ruins. They tell a story. The 5 original warriors weren't punished. They offered themselves voluntarily. They were brothers who loved this valley and knew something had to be done when they discovered the door. They sealed themselves alive in these pillars to keep it closed. But they betrayed that duty," added María Eugenia. "My grandfather's diary says the spirits went mad after centuries of solitude. They began to desire freedom more than protecting the world. That's why, when the 5 men entered, the spirits offered them the gold in exchange for weakening the seal." Paulo, the superstitious twin, fell to his knees. "Then we're doomed either way. Either we seal ourselves alive in stone, or the world ends." 5 lives, murmured Clemencia. "But it doesn't specify they have to be ours, right?" Everyone looked at her with horror. "No," said María Eugenia firmly. "We're not going to sacrifice innocence." "And what do you propose?" Pedro exploded. "I have a wife, 3 children. Clemencia has students who depend on her. Paulo and I have businesses supporting dozens of families. Augusto is a lawyer on important cases. What do you have, Maria? You're a widow, childless. If anyone here can—" Augusto's slap interrupted Pedro's words. "Never suggest something like that again. No life is worth more than another." But the words had already been said. The seed of discord had been planted exactly as the spirits desired. Over the following hours, as they placed the masks on the pillars, only temporarily to buy time, the tension among them grew. Pedro began to separate from the group, whispering with Paulo. Clemencia cried silently in a corner. Only Maria, Augusto, and Tomás seemed to maintain composure. "We could try to deceive them," suggested Tomás when the others weren't listening. "Create decoys, mannequins with our blood. Ancient rituals sometimes accept symbolic substitutes." "It won't work," said a voice from the shadows. The 3 turned. It was the shaman who had descended after them without being noticed. "I knew you'd come," María Eugenia told him. "You lied to us. You knew from the beginning that sacrifice was required." The old man nodded. "If I had told you the truth, you never would have come. And you had to come, you had to see, you had to understand the weight your ancestors left upon you." "Is there really any other way?" asked Augusto desperately. The shaman remained silent for a long moment. Finally he spoke. "There is one. But it requires something that may be harder than dying." "What is it?" "True forgiveness." The 5 spirits became corrupt, not only from solitude, but from hatred. Hatred toward mortals who enjoyed the freedom they didn't have. If your 5 hearts can find genuine forgiveness for what your ancestors did, if you can forgive even these spirits for tormenting you, the seal can be renewed without death. "That's all?" Pedro had approached, listening. "Just forgive." "It's not just forgive." The shaman looked at him sternly. "To truly forgive is to bleed without spilling blood. It's to die without ceasing to breathe. It's the most difficult sacrifice of all." At that moment, the dark fragment that had emerged from the door suddenly expanded. One of its tentacles of void brushed Paulo. The twin screamed. When he backed away, he had aged 30 years in a sec. His hair was completely white, his face furrowed with deep wrinkles. "The eclipse is in 3 days," said the warrior leader, "and with each passing hour, the door opens more. Decide soon, heirs, because time, as you've already seen, is not on your side." But what none of them knew was that one of the 5 had already made their decision, and that decision would change them all. 2 days later, they had established a camp inside the cavern. The shaman had descended completely, bringing provisions and protective herbs he constantly burned to keep the dark fragment contained. But everyone knew it was only a matter of hours before the eclipse. María Eugenia couldn't sleep. She walked among the pillars, observing the masks they had temporarily placed. The gold faces seemed to follow her with their eyes, judging her. "You can't sleep either." Tomás appeared at her side. In recent days they had grown close. united by something more than the shared curse. I keep thinking about my grandfather, Maria confessed. About his cowardice, as he himself called it. He didn't have the courage to die to close the seal, but he also didn't have the courage to live with that guilt. He let himself be consumed slowly by the spirits, instead of choosing. Maybe that's the lesson, said Tomas, that we can't live in the middle. Either we choose life completely, with all its weights, or we choose death with purpose. But living halfway is what destroys us. Before Maria could respond, a scream pierced the cavern. It was Clemencia. She stood in front of the pile of gold, hands extended as if to touch it. I see him. I see my father. He's calling me. He says if I take just one piece of gold, I can buy him back. I can save him. Augusto ran and pulled her away just in time. It's not real. It's an illusion. Your father has been dead for 40 years. I know, Clemencia screamed, tears falling. I know he's dead, but don't you understand? If I take that gold, at least I could have made his death mean something. I could have used that wealth to help others. Instead, he died for nothing. For nothing. He didn't die for nothing, said Maria softly, embracing her. He died because he was deceived, just like all our ancestors. But we can give meaning to that death now. We can choose differently. Clemencia collapsed in her arms, sobbing. The shaman approached, observing the sky through a crack in the cavern's ceiling. The eclipse begins in 6 hours. You must decide, all of you. The 5 heirs gathered in a circle around the pillars. The atmosphere was tense. Pedro and Paulo barely spoke to each other after Paulo, prematurely aged, had accused his brother of thinking only of himself. I have a proposal, said Pedro finally. We draw lots. One of us stays. The other 4 live. The seal requires 5, the shaman reminded. Then 2. 2 stay, 3 live. It doesn't work that way. Tomas shook his head. Either it's all 5 or none. The seal recognizes intention. If only some do it by obligation or chance, it won't work. Then we're talking about forgiveness, said Augusto. As the shaman said, true forgiveness. How? Asked Paulo with his aged voice. How do we forgive those who put us in this situation? My father committed suicide. Yours, he pointed to Augusto, was murdered. Everyone's ancestors were selfish and ambitious. How do we forgive that? María Eugenia took a deep breath. Let's start with the most difficult. I forgive my grandfather for his greed. I forgive his cowardice. I forgive that he left me this burden. The words resonated in the cavern. Something changed in the air. The 5 pillars pulsed with soft light. One by one, the others followed. Augusto. I forgive your grandfather, Maria, for killing mine. I forgive my own grandfather for provoking the duel with his ambition. Clemencia. I forgive my father for poisoning himself. I forgive his weakness. Tomas. I forgive my father for his betrayal of his vows. I forgive that he never knew me. Paulo. I forgive my father for abandoning us with his death. I forgive. Everyone looked at Pedro. The skeptical twin trembled, hands clenched into fists. I can't. He whispered. I can't forgive. Because of them, I'm here. Because of them, my family is at risk. Because of them, Pedro. His brother Paulo put a hand on his shoulder. Look at me. Look at what has happened to me. I've aged 30 years in 2 days. But you know what? For the first time in my life, I'm not afraid. Because I finally understand something. Forgiveness isn't for them. It's for us to free ourselves. Pedro looked at him, tears falling. But if I forgive them, it's like saying what they did was okay. No, said Maria. It's saying we will no longer let what they did control who we are. Silence stretched. The shaman watched the sky. The eclipse was beginning. The moon was starting to darken, and then Pedro spoke, with a broken but firm voice. I forgive my father. I forgive his sin, and I forgive myself for judging him. The light from the pillars exploded. The 5 masks fused with the stone. The gold warriors screamed, not in pain, but in liberation, and something happened that no one expected. The masks didn't imprison the spirits. They freed them from their corruption. And what emerged weren't fallen guardians, but something completely different. The gold figures dissolved, and in their place remained 5 translucent, almost ethereal human forms. The 5 original warriors, but now purified, freed from the hatred that had corrupted them for centuries. At last, said the tallest with a voice full of relief. At last, someone understood. Understood what? Asked María Eugenia, still trembling from the moment's intensity. That the true seal was never our sacrifice, explained another warrior. It was our love for this valley. When that love turned to resentment, the seal weakened. Your ancestors didn't break the seal with ambition. They broke it by making us lose faith in humanity. But you offered us the gold, accused Pedro. You tempted us. No, the 3rd warrior denied. That was the darkness from below, using our forms. We were trapped, prisoners in our own prisons. By forgiving your ancestors, you forgave us too. And in doing so, you returned what we had lost. The shaman approached with tears in his blind eyes. The 5 warriors were my ancestors. I have waited 60 years to see them free. Above, through the ceiling crack, the moon was almost completely eclipsed. The critical moment approached. "The door," said Maria. "What happens with the door?" The warrior leader looked down, where the dark fragment writhed increasingly violently. "That door can never be completely closed. It's part of the universe's balance, but it can be contained. And now, with the seal restored not by obligation but by choice, by forgiveness, it will remain closed not for 100 years, but for 1,000. "And you?" asked Tomas. "What happens to you now?" The 5 warriors smiled. "We can finally rest. Pass to the next place. But first," each warrior approached one of the heirs. The leader stopped in front of María Eugenia. "Your grandfather," he told her, "called to me the night before he died. He asked my forgiveness. I couldn't give it to him then because I was still trapped in hatred. But now I can tell you he is forgiven, and you, for carrying his burden, are free." Maria felt something break inside her, a chain she didn't know she carried. She cried, not from sadness but from liberation. One by one, the warriors did the same with each heir, giving them the forgiveness their ancestors had never received. When the moment of total eclipse arrived, the 5 warriors merged with the pillars not as prisoners, but as voluntary guardians one last time. Their purified energy sealed the door with a light so bright it illuminated the entire cavern. The gold disappeared, not taken but returned to the earth from which it came. The dark fragment was sucked back down with a scream that made the walls tremble. And then silence, peace. The 5 heirs and the shaman remained in the cavern until the eclipse passed. When they finally emerged, dawn awaited them. The marks on their wrists had disappeared. The silver bullets had turned to dust that the wind carried away. "What do we do now?" asked Clemencia. María Eugenia looked toward the valley stretching below them, bathed in golden dawn light. "We live. We live without the weight of our ancestors' sins. And if we ever have children, we teach them something our grandfathers forgot." "What?" asked Augusto. "That some doors must remain closed, that some gold isn't worth taking, and that forgiveness, though painful, is the only gunpowder that can truly destroy the chains of the past." As they descended the mountain, none looked back. The mine of 5 tears sealed behind them, invisible to anyone who didn't know to look for it. But if any traveler passed through the throat of silence on a full moon night, they might hear something in the wind. It wasn't a lament or a warning. It was something stranger, more beautiful, the sound of 5 voices singing in an ancient language, voluntary guardians protecting the valley they loved. Because when the gunpowder spoke that last time in 1889, it didn't only announce death and curse. It also planted the seeds of forgiveness that would take 60 years to bloom, but finally would. And thus, the story of 5 cursed families became the story of 5 people who chose to free themselves. 20 years later, 1969, María Eugenia Salazar, now 52 years old, sat at her desk in Bogotá. She was a respected historian, specializing in Colombian legends and indigenous traditions. But there was one story she had never published, one she kept in a manuscript locked away. Tomás Salcedo, her husband of 17 years, entered the office with coffee. They had married 2 years after leaving the mine, united by something deeper than any curse, the certainty of having faced darkness together and chosen light. "Still thinking about publishing it?" asked Tomás, pointing to the manuscript. "I don't know," Maria admitted. "Who would believe this story? Cursed mines, gold spirits, doors to other worlds. The 5 of us lived it. Paulo died last year, and with his last breath made me promise the story wouldn't be lost." Maria opened the manuscript. On the first page they had written all the names: Rodrigo Salazar, Ignacio Mendoza, Felipe Vargas, Hernando Duarte, Vicente Salcedo, the 5 men whose ambition had begun it all. But on the last page they had added 5 more names: María Eugenia, Augusto, Clemencia, Pedro, and Paulo, the 5 heirs who had finished what their grandfathers began. And between both lists a single word: forgiven. "I think," said Maria finally, "I will publish it, but not as a horror story, as testimony that even the darkest curses can be broken, that the sins of fathers don't have to define the children, and that forgiveness, though it seems impossible, is the most powerful magic that exists." That night, Maria began to write. The story would be published 2 years later under the title When the Gunpowder Spoke, Memory of a Broken Curse. The book never became famous. It didn't win literary awards or appear on bestseller lists, but it had something more valuable. It reached the right hands. In a small bookstore in Villa de Leyva, a young man found the book by chance. His surname was Vargas, and he had just discovered his great-great-grandfather had died under mysterious circumstances. The book gave him answers. But more importantly, it gave him permission to forgive. In Medellin, a teacher named Mendoza read the book to her students. She taught them that history isn't only about great battles and famous heroes, but also about ordinary people facing extraordinary darkness and choosing light. In Cali, the children of Pedro and Paulo Duarte kept the book as a family treasure, a reminder that their father and uncle had been part of something that saved not only their lives, but an entire valley. And at the National University, an anthropology student named Salcedo used the book as a starting point for his thesis on the importance of forgiveness in indigenous conflict resolution traditions. The Uwa shaman, who survived to 110 years old, died in peace in 1975. His last words were, "The seal remains, the guardians rest, and the valley continues alive because 5 people chose to forgive." The Mine of 5 Tears was never found again. Some say it closed completely. Others, that it only shows itself to those who truly need it. But on full moon nights, the inhabitants of Santander occasionally hear something in the wind descending from the mountains. It sounds like a distant gunshot, like the echo of gunpowder speaking through time. But it's no longer a warning. It's a reminder that even the most violent sound can, with time and forgiveness, become music, that the bullets that separated can transform into bridges that unite, and that when gunpowder finally speaks its truth, it doesn't tell stories of death, but of the 1,000 small deaths we choose so we can keep living. Because that is the true lesson of the 5 heirs, that to forgive doesn't mean to forget, nor to excuse, nor to surrender. It simply means refusing to let the past have the last word about the future. And in the mountains of Colombia, where 5 men once stole cursed gold, now flourishes a valley where 5 spirits finally rest, guarding not by obligation, but by love, a door that must remain closed, not for 100 years, not for 1,000, but for as long as love is stronger than hate, and forgiveness more powerful than revenge, forever. This story reminds us of a fundamental truth that crosses generations and borders. The sins of our ancestors can mark us, but they don't have to define us. María Eugenia and the other heirs could have chosen bitterness, resentment, the search for culprits. Instead, they chose the more difficult path, forgiveness. In our own lives, we all carry invisible inheritances, family traumas, repeated patterns, errors transmitted from generation to generation. Like the gunpowder in this story, these weights can explode at any moment if we don't face them. But we also have the capacity the 5 heirs had, the capacity to break the cycle, not with violence, not with denial, but with the revolutionary act of forgiving. Forgiving not because others deserve it, but because we deserve to be free. What curses do you carry? What dark doors did you inherit? And are you ready to be the one who finally closes them, not with vengeance, but with forgiveness? If this story moved you, please subscribe to the channel for more stories that touch the heart and mind. Hit like if the message of forgiveness resonated with you, and share with someone who needs to hear that it's possible to free themselves from the past. Comment, which part of the story impacted you most? I read every comment and love knowing your reflections. Remember, when gunpowder speaks, it can announce death, or it can announce the birth of something new. The choice is always ours. Thank you for staying until the end. See you in the next story.
Harina sin fin bajo el sol, el cielo inmenso me vio, un eco lejano nació, mi alma a la nada voló. Bastó desierto voz de mi andar, un solo de viento al pasar, resuena en la soledad, mi eterna verdad. Silencio que grita sin fin, bajo estrellas dulce rubí, el tiempo se olvida aquí, solo mi sombra y de mí. Vasto desierto, voz de mi andar, un solo de viento al pasar, resuena en la soledad, mi eterna verdad. No hay fin ni principio ya, solo el eco que volverá. En cada grano de arena está mi alma libre al fin.